I want to put a different question out there that relates to what you're talking about, which is the communication, not just between people and people, but there's been historically a belief that religion is about communicating with the divine, talking with God, or for some people, God talking with them. Yeah. People joke that the 2 tablets that Moses gave, now we have different tablets that we have here. How are you seeing the changes in communications technology affecting the way we think about and talk about a relationship with God and theology?
Thank you. I think that's super important, and it's one of the, one of the questions I use to pose that is, so if there was a prayer app that just had, a blank field, and you put your prayer in, and then you pressed send, and that's it. Yes. And the question I like to consider is that prayer? Is that a real prayer? Or does it require me like putting kind of a pious look on my face and going down like this and then saying, God, I right now am full of despair and I don't know what to do and I just need your help. It doesn't matter which way I do that if I actually am coming authentically from the heart. And so technology sometimes gives kind of it's almost a ritualistic online vehicle for certain acts. I mean, there are Hindu temples which view it as totally legitimate to drag an offering to a deity, press click, and you've dragged a kind of icon of a flower and done some sort of cash donation to the temple, and that is so I would say there's a quality difference, but in some ways we can't always get to the temple. We can't always go to the Western Wall and put in a prayer, but someone can do that for us, or we can maybe, I just don't know. I'm still think that that's a theological issue that's being worked out. What does it mean to really do something? I think this is what the virtual world, but where a lot of us live. I mean, if I hate to tell you how much I live on the internet, because for me it's so weird. I'm one of those people, like I write you an email, I'm like, TikTok, it's been a minute, so what are you doing? But I live so much on the internet, like is that really living if I'm interacting on the internet, or is that not count? And it's only when I'm talking to you guys directly.
Well, it raises the question, if one of the functions of prayer or spiritual practice is to heighten a moment, to make it special, different, and significant, then there is a subjective element to that. It could be it's heightening the moment we would have anyway, which is opening our phones. It could be heightening a moment of conversation. It could be heightening a moment of reflection. And so I do think that there's an adaptability inherent to it. From the Jewish standpoint, prayer as we know it today is a relatively new innovation. I mean, you read the book of Leviticus, and it's what I say, perhaps a little too irreverently, great Jewish barbecue was seen as the way that one worshipped. And since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, prayer has totally evolved and come into its own. And so it is seen from a historical lens of a tradition that's maybe 4 millennia old as something that inherently has to evolve, pardon me. So I feel as though
the question I would ask you, which is there's a Christian corollary, is if 10 people are online together, is that a minion?
What is community?
For Christians, it's like Jesus says, when 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. So if I'm having like some sort of Skype prayer chat, or is Jesus there, or do we have to be enfleshed? Which is a real question, and I don't know the answer.
Or another question: so the 3 of us could be physically together, all interacting on our iPhones.
Right.
Oh, right.
What does presence mean in an era of technology?
Right.
What does it actually mean?
The flip side of that, what's interesting is my old congregation and other congregations are doing this, what they're calling a visual tefillah, a visual prayer service, where traditionally in Judaism, everyone's looking down at their prayer book, and what ends up happening is when you're singing, you're muffled, and you're not able to see people, so what they create is this visual tefillah, where it's not just the words, but it's images, and they're projected almost like a mega church in a way. And the ones that I've seen and have done have been some of the most spiritual services I've been to, because everyone's singing, everyone's seeing each other, everyone's seeing more images. Is it the next evolution of what prayer might look like? Because is it feel like traditional prayer? No. But if the goal is to create a spiritual experience, oftentimes for me that works better than davening, praying a standard prayer service.
So it evokes questions of subjective versus objective, individual versus communal, and whether prayer is dialogical at all, and whether, what sort of cuts to the core of prayer. And I would imagine that technology in general is evoking questions that might have resided below the surface, and now all of a sudden are front and center in a very different kind of way.
Well, and it gets back to your original point, like the diffusion of authority and how we decide to do these things. We don't know what, like, some cool Jewish teenagers are doing, maybe innovating in a way that we haven't even seen yet. I think that there's stuff, I think that the important thing is that we neither dismiss nor wholly just kind of take hook, line, and sinker. I don't even know. I'm not a fisherman. Is that right?
I'm a vegetarian. I don't know.
Okay. So it sounded basically right. But I do think that we should be examining these questions, using the tools of our faith, but also using I think that there is something about the efficacy question, like what is working? How do we feel engaged in our tradition? How do we feel more engaged, more, how do we make ourselves, better people?
and it's almost like conscious use of technology. There was an interesting piece that just came out. I have a 13-month-old, and there was
you seem pretty well rested.
I'm shocked. She slept well last night. But the American Association of Pediatrics, as a lot of people know, had said no screen time up until 2 years old. And there was an article, I think, in Slate or somewhere a couple days ago, where some people are pushing back on that it is a different world, and it's not so much about no screen time, but conscious screen time.
Yeah.
And how can you use that as an opportunity to create relationships with your children? And what's the right balance, and how are you using all these different kinds of technologies? Is it mindful or is it mindless? Which is, now we're going to the Buddhist tradition.